In the previous video, I talked a little bit about this course, Islam in America, and I talked about some of the choices that we make as we study this field of Islam in America or Muslims in the United States. And one could even design a course around each one of those choices. So, for example, one of the things we're going to be studying is the very important history of the United States, where Muslims first arrive in the United States. For some time in the field of Islam in the United States, people have assumed that Muslims first arrived in the United States in the 1960s as engineers and doctors and students and graduate students, and they created MSA and ISNA and so on. This is not the beginning of the history of Islam in America. Muslims have been in this land for a lot longer than that. So when we think about the history where white traders forcibly bring Africans to these shores, many of those people were Muslim. We are going to spend some time in the beginning of this course, with a Bismillah for this course, studying the history of these foreparents of ours, these men and women who came to this land, who were Muslim, and who worked hard to keep the legacy of their faith alive. This is a legacy and a history that has not been emphasized very much. And so we are going to spend some time commemorating those people who made the Bismillah of Islam in this land. So we're going to be starting by studying a book called Servants of Allah. And each one of you, I'm going to ask each one of you to present a chapter, to study a chapter from that book, and to present on it in our next class. So this is going to be our Bismillah for this course. We are going to sort of turn our spiritual attention to these people who were forcibly ripped from their homes in Africa and brought to this land. Once we have spent some time with this study, and we're also going to be looking at chapter 1 in Edward Curtis's book, Muslims in America. This is also going to be one of your textbooks, so you should order it as soon as possible. We are going to then turn to the study of the first American converts, and we're going to be looking at a couple of case studies, one of them being Alexander Russell Webb, who was a convert and who was a Muslim and who lived in Victorian times in America. So we're going to be taking a quick look at his life and what that tells us about America at that time, and about what Muslim identity was like, what it was like being a Muslim at that time, but specifically for Alexander Russell Webb, who was a white person and a person of some status. We will then move to the early 20th century to look at the early Muslim immigrants. We're not talking about the 1960s, we're not talking about that time, we're talking about the very early Muslim immigrants who came to the prairies as peddlers, who set up the first small prayer rooms in their homes, who set up ways of washing their dead for janazah prayers, and who did not have access to a lot of the religious life that they had access to back home. So we are going to be looking at those early times when none of the institutions that we are now used to existed. We're then going to go on to look at the Muslims of the later 20th century, and some of the organizations and institutions, as well as debates and controversies that develop around this time. We're also going to be looking at a very important figure, one might say perhaps the most important figure in the study, in this history of Islam in the United States, and that is our brother Malcolm X. We're going to be reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I'm going to ask each one of you to present on a portion of this important book. So then we're going to look at some later religious trends in America, and we're going to be looking at, for example, the professor who lived here in Chicago, Professor Fazlur Rahman. He was a Pakistani professor who came here and who developed some different ways of thinking about Islam and interpretive work on the Quran and Hadith. He has been enormously influential. In many ways, you might say that even if you don't know his name, you have probably been influenced by his thought. So he's somebody that I'm going to ask you to do a little research on. Another person who has been enormously influential has been Professor Amina Wadud, who was also influenced by Professor Fazlur Rahman, and I'm going to ask that you study her work as well. As an exemplar of some of the religious trends of that time, I'm going to also look at the Sufi teacher, Baba Muhyiddin. Baba Muhyiddin was a Sri Lankan Sufi sheikh who came to this country with no English, and he led a very devoted group of people. And I'm going to ask you to do a little research. Most of his followers ended up being white Americans, and his grave continues to be a place that people visit to this day to give blessings and to pray for his soul. So I'm going to ask you to do a little research now. These are people who exemplify certain trends and certain ideas, as well as who lead many different trends of thought in Islam in America. I'm then going to ask you to go on to look at the history of Islam in early America through the study of Old Islam in Detroit, a book by Sally Howell, and I'm going to ask you to read chapters from this book. And then we're going to jump forward and look at the aftermath of 9/11 and the impact on Muslim Americans of Islamophobia and the war on terror. So we're going to read a chapter from a book called How Does It Feel to Be a Problem? And we're going to read a book and we're going to watch part of a film called Adama about these two young women, Muslim women, who came under the impact of the security state after 9/11. We're going to then look at various trends among American Sufis through different times. There is a huge variety, you would be surprised to know, and there are various trends and typologies that you can use to look at, so we're going to be doing that as well. I'm going to then ask you to look at my book. I have written a book on Muslim American women on campus, and though it focuses on Muslim undergraduate women, it also focuses on what it means to be Muslim in America, but also what it means to be American, and how being Muslim affects being American and vice versa. So we're going to read part of that book as well. We're then going to look at race and religion. Very often we talk about how Muslims are all one ummah, and race doesn't define us, and it's what Islam that defines us. But we have been afflicted, this community has been afflicted by racism and anti-blackness for a very long time. And part of that racism has been the erasure in many contexts of the history of Black Muslims in this country. So we're going to be looking at the work of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collective and the work they do against racism within the Muslim community. And then we're also going to be looking at this binary through the work of Sylvia Chan Malik, this binary between immigrants and Black Muslims. So we're going to be doing that. We're also going to be doing something fun, which is we're going to be looking at the comic book character, Kamala Khan, or Ms. Marvel, which is a comic book about a Muslim Pakistani American superhero, and how that comic book sort of develops a particular interpretation, a particular perspective on being Muslim in this country. So we're going to be doing that. So this is just part of the journey that we're going to be following, and I'm going to, this was me giving you a little intro to the tour that we're going to be following. And I don't want to be the tour guide. I want you to go along with this tour and to really engage with it and to develop the tour as we go along. And what I would like you to do is each time I would like you to do a little research on the topic that we are following, and don't limit yourself to the reading, though please do the reading. It's really essential to your learning. So please do the reading and do some additional research around the topic to develop a perspective on the different topics that we're going to be covering.